there's a document, the employment application from Gerald Hemming to go to work for the CIA. On the back, where you list past employers for references, Klein's Sporting Goods, Chicago, Illinois. What I was reading was HSCA testimony about a guy named Loren Hall. I bet a lot of money that Loren Hall was on the ground that day. He was born in 1930. His parents were Cuban immigrants. He was born Lorenzo Pasillo and Americanized his name. And he joined the Army, got out of the Army. He got, through the late 50s, more and more ultra right-wing, and ended up, left his family down fighting with Castro and Che in the hills. And like a lot of those guys, you know, Castro made the sugar deal and everything with the Soviets, and they turned against him and started fighting against him and became these Cuban raiders. And Hall was one of these guys. He actually ended up in a Cuban prison for about 4 months, was a cellmate of Santo Trafficante. And Hall was the real thing. You know, I think the word mercenary words lose meaning, you know, and we got to think about what these guys were and who they were. What I do with people to illustrate that is just to look at a 2-month span leading up to the assassination and things that happened with Loren Hall, and just to illustrate the type of life this guy was leading. On September 2nd of 1963, he was busted in Key Largo, Florida for Neutrality Act violations. And what that means is, you know, you live in Canada. Let's say a bunch of me and my buddies, we get a bunch of Jeeps and some rifles and we go invade Canada, you know. Well, that's a Neutrality Act violation. That's what these guys were doing. They got busted on the docks, boat full of guns, they're ready to go. Customs takes them in. September 4th, he gets out. Now, this is the kind of guy he was. Does he keep his nose clean? No. He flies to L.A., meets with a guy named Lawrence Howard and a guy named William Seymour. What's the first thing they do? They load up a trailer full of stolen guns that they're going to haul back to Miami to sell to Cuban exiles. They get the guns to Dallas on September 24th. They drop them, go back to Miami. Well, on October 12th, they show back up to pick these guns up. These guns were being converted to fully automatic. So they're going to pick these illegal guns up, stolen, go back to Miami. Well, they get pulled over on the way to get to the trailer. They got popped for amphetamine possession. They got a box full of pills. So they go to jail. They call Robert Morris. Robert Morris was General Edwin Walker's business partner and attorney. Well, he arranged for their bail. Not only that, but they called an FBI agent. Remember the thing that happened with Oswald when he got arrested for passing out the flyers, the fight?
Yeah.
Same thing happened with Hall, Seymour, and Howard on the drug charge. The drug charge was dropped. Okay, so they get their guns back to Miami. On October 29th, they've got a station wagon hooked to a boat full of guns. Here they go. They're going to raid Cuba again. He gets pulled over by a customs agent. Hall does, pulling this boat. Well, luckily, another guy named Tom Duncan had talked him into taking the guns out of the boat and putting them in another car. So he barely gets popped, barely misses getting popped again for a Neutrality Act violation. So that gives you an indication of the kind of guy we're dealing with. Why Loren Hall is important, I looked into him enough. I think he was on the ground there. And it goes back to a rifle that Loren Hall picked up in Los Angeles 10 days before the hit in Dallas. There was a rifle that was a Johnson 30-06 semi-automatic sniper rifle, sound suppressor, bipod, 40-power scope, that a private detective in L.A. named Richard Hathcock had possession of. A buddy of Hall's owed him money on it. Well, 10 days before the hit, Hall shows up in L.A., writes a check to get the rifle back. $150 on the account of the Citizens Committee to Free Cuba. Was Eladio Del Val. He used Del Val's check to get the Johnson 30-06 rifle with the bipod and the scope and the sound suppressor out of Hawk and take it to Dallas. And that's the rifle we can pretty well establish was found in Dallas after the assassination. Tells Hathcock, I'm going to Dallas. Off he goes. 5 days later, they see him again. What are you doing? Don't have time to talk to you. I got to catch a plane to Dallas. And he takes off. Now, This is very important, and we know this because we have not only HSCA testimony, but the FBI report of this incident. It was to Special Agent in Charge, Los Angeles, designation 89-75 from Special Agent Jerome Crow. At 9 a.m. on the morning of November 23rd, Hathcock got a knock on his door at his private detective agency where the rifle had been. And it was Jerome Crow and another agent. And they demanded to see him and Roy Payne, which was an investigator that worked for him. So they called Payne down, they set them both down, and Jerome Crow asked 3 pointed questions that morning. Remember, this is 10 a.m. Dallas time on the 23rd, less, 20 hours, 20 and a half hours, is that right? Since the hit. And Crow sat down and asked 3 questions. And we know this because not only from Payne's testimony to the House Select Committee, Hathcock's testimony to the House Select Committee, but also we've got the FBI report. And what he asked him was this. Number 1, Roy Payne, were you in Dallas yesterday? And Roy Payne kind of freaked out a little bit. You know, what the hell do you mean? You know, what's this all about? So he says, okay, second question. When's the last time you saw Lauren Hall? 5 days ago. Third question. What are your fingerprints doing on a Johnson 30-06 sniper rifle? Okay, now, let's stop and break down what we just read, what we just heard. In my mind, Lynn, we can draw 3 pretty concrete conclusions from those 3 questions. Number 1, Roy Payne, were you in Dallas? The conclusion I think we can draw is that they tied that rifle to Dallas because of question 3, and I'll get to that. Question 2, when's the last time you saw Lauren Hall? I think we can conclude that they tied the rifle to Hall and tied Hall to Dallas. The third question, and this is the biggie to me, Roy Payne, what were your fingerprints doing on that rifle? Not only did they find it in Dallas, not only did they tie it to Hall, but they had possession of this rifle. They had fingerprinted this rifle. And less than 24 hours after the hit, they had pinpointed who Roy Payne was, where he worked, and they were bracing him hard. And I think that's huge. Now, who did the rifle belong to? The rifle was the property of Gerald Patrick Hemming. That's who owned the rifle. Belonged to him. You know what I think? I think he knew the truth, and I think he spent decades weaving a masterful web of lies intertwined with threads of the truth. I think because there's thousands of documents and interviews and transcripts and everything about this guy, I think he told us what happened in there somewhere. It's just a matter of decoding it and trying to pick out the BS and trying to pick out what seems real and what you can corroborate in other places. But I think he did know, and I think he tried to tell us, but I think it's interesting that I heard from another researcher that the reason that Noel Twyman's Bloody Treason wasn't reprinted was because Hemming threw such a fit legally, and that the reason is that he went too far with what he told Twyman, and he knew it, and he started backtracking. But back to Lauren Hall. Did you know that this guy that took this rifle to Dallas that belonged to Hemming, this bona fide badass mercenary operator, actually testified to the HSCA in secret? He got immunized testimony. That means this guy was immune. He could have walked right in there and said, I was on top of the Dowtex and hit him right in the back of the head, and legally they couldn't do nothing about it. There are some gems in his testimony. It starts right off the bat. Right off the bat. They set him down. He's got immunized testimony. This guy is free and clear. Mr. Hall, where were you on November 22nd, 1963? Lauren Hall replies, I respectfully decline to answer under my rights of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution in that it may incriminate me. Isn't that amazing? Because right after this, they stop everything and they show him the order that he signed, or the agreement that he signed, and they have an order from a circuit judge, ordered, pretty much, look, you have to tell us, you have to answer the questions or we're going to throw you in jail. So they get the guy settled down. Where were you on November 22nd, 1963? And he answers, I was in Monterey Park, California. I took my wife to work, and I went back home. So what in the hell is so incriminating about that? You know, why did he panic and plead the fifth when you've got immunity? On that question, that's the biggie. It seems almost like to me when I read it that he wasn't expecting that question first, and it caught him off guard. But now, get this. Roy Hathcock, you know, the guy that had the rifle, he testified to the HSCA about a month and a half after Hall did. He didn't have immunized testimony, but he testified. And this is what he told the HSCA about Hall's whereabouts on November 22nd. I received a telephone call at the office from Loren Hall about 2 weeks after the assassination. I said, hey, buddy, you better have a lot of witnesses because you were in Dallas at the time of the assassination, and we both know it. And Hall said, I've got witnesses to prove I was right in the middle of the lobby of the Dallas Hilton Hotel. And 100 people know I was there. I was nowhere near where Kennedy was assassinated. But the matter's dropped at that point. Nobody asked the next question. Or as far as I know, they never recalled Hall. He only testified to him one time. There we go again, apathy within the HSCA. And they had plenty of opportunities to kind of hook Hall on some things. There's an amazing exchange in his testimony where he starts out talking about the CIA, Hall, I mean. And he ends up talking about a meeting where money changes hands with some pretty notorious people. But again, they say thank you and they move on. It just blows my mind to read this stuff because, you know, well, it's a situation that there's so many times when I read this stuff that the follow-up question occurs to me, but it never gets asked. And you want to go, well, what are you thinking? You know, there's one exchange with his testimony. They're talking about his connections with the CIA and whether or not he's connected with the CIA. And he doesn't know. But and I don't know where they got the information, but there's a guy named Triplett, and he asks, I'm sure he must have had prior info or prior knowledge, but he asked Hall he says, did you clear your version of your whereabouts on November 22nd, 1963 with any official of any governmental agency? Okay, let me back up. Hall, what they're talking about is with the Garrison investigation, because Garrison tried to extradite Hall from California. Jim Garrison was the first guy to identify this particular bunch of anti-Castro operators as the possible ground crew. He had a photograph of Hall, Howard, and Seymour, Lawrence Howard and William Seymour, that he showed around for a while and called them Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod, because he didn't know what their names were, but he knew it had to do with the Odio incident, because Lord Hall actually told the FBI in '64 that it was him, Seymour, and Howard, and Seymour was the guy that got mistaken for Oswald, but Lawrence Howard threatened to kill him, so he recanted his story. But Garrison tried to extradite Hall, and Hall enlisted the help of Ed Meese, who was in the Reagan administration in California at the time, and they successfully blocked his extradition. But he turned around and went and talked to Garrison voluntarily anyway. He never testified under oath, but he did give him a statement. He did interview with Garrison. But this guy Triplett asks him if he had cleared his version of his whereabouts with anybody before he went to talk to Garrison. And Hall says, well, I think I did. Yes, sir. And that's a quote. You know, what a crazy answer. And he says, oh, who would that have been? And Hall says, I don't recall his name. Well, where'd you get his number? He says it was in the telephone directory. Triplett, which agency? Hall, the Central Intelligence Agency. So he called the CIA, even though he wasn't affiliated with them, to clear his story before he went to Garrison.
If I recall, he did this because he said he had a couple of attempts on his life, and he thought, well, if there's anybody out to get me, it would more than likely be somebody from the agency.
He said he was run off a canyon road on his way to Bakersfield and almost died. And 2 weeks later, on New Year's Eve, somebody hit him in the arm with infectious hepatitis, and he about died. But, yeah, so he's cleared this with the CIA, even though he says he wasn't affiliated with them, which is really strange to me. The guy says, so you felt an obligation to clear your story with the CIA first? And Hall says, yes, I did. So what was your relationship to the CIA? I don't know. And this is where he gets interesting. He says, did you ever receive any money that you knew of from the CIA? And Hall says, possibly. And Triplett says, you don't know. And Hall says, I don't know. And he says, well, who gave it to you? Hall says, it was not given to me. It was given to another person, and we got part of it. Triplett. Who is that person? Hall. Sam Giancana. Triplett. How much money? Hall. I can't remember. It was either 20 or 30,000. Now, are you telling us Giancana said, here's some money I got from the CIA? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I'm not sure where the money came from. So now, what's important to me about that is you got to remember that nobody's brought up one time an anti-Castro operation. You know, we know about the CIA and the mafia and the Castro plots and the funding, the raiding, but this questioning started out with November 22nd, and suddenly we're talking about a meeting where Hall and these military operators got $30,000 from Sam Giancana, who got it from the CIA. And they literally end that line of questioning with, I don't know where I got the money. I don't know where the money came from. Okay, thank you. Let's move on. And to me, that's, I don't know, maybe I just have a higher standard or something. It's really kind of sad. But they just let it go. Now, if you think about that story and about this bunch that Hall used to run with called Interpen, these mercenaries, in Noel Twyman's Bloody Treason, he tells the story of John Martino. John Martino was kind of a CIA mafia. He was in that bunch, and he was actually in prison with Hall and Trafficante, the same Cuban prison. And Twyman tells the story of Martino telling his wife that there was a meeting at his house where $15,000 changed hands from Sam Giancana to another one of Hall's pals, one of Hemming's buddies. It was Hemming's hero. Hemming actually named a son after this guy, named Felipe Vidal Santiago. He was killed and executed in '66 in Cuba. And $15,000 changed hands. And Martino apparently told his wife, who told this to Gaten Fonzie and Noel Twyman years later, that there was a young Cuban kid in a red shirt at that meeting where the $15,000 changed hands, who didn't say much. And he told his wife, Florence, that kid was involved. He was in Dallas. So Twyman doesn't, he just takes this story, doesn't really give Hemming the background on it. Goes back to Hemming and says, and this is what Gaten Fonzie in the room, he says, hey, you know, there was a meeting at Martino's house where you guys got some money from Giancana? And Hemming goes, yeah. Twyman says, who was the kid with the red shirt, sat on the couch, didn't say much? And he says, oh, that was Ronald Ponce de Leon. Well, he was one of the Interpen mercenaries, along with Hall, Hemming, Howard, Seymour. But Twyman didn't tell him the other part, kind of suckered him in and giving him up. Santiago was in Dallas up until the 22nd. We know this. How do we know this? Felipe Vidal Santiago was confined to Miami because of his Neutrality Act violations and his gun running charges, and was required to contact the INS whenever he left Dade County. There is an INS document that states that somebody needs to go talk to him. He's in trouble because they found out he left Miami by car to go to Dallas on November 18th, and he returned by plane and was on the ground before 6:30 p.m. on Friday, November 22nd, 1963. And this is from an INS document. Totally separate thing. It's just something that's there. Proof that Santiago was in Dallas with Hall. To me, when you can cross that kind of terrain between a seemingly innocuous INS document to people like that, to me, there's where your corroboration's at. It's in the documents. It's in the words. You know, I've got a very good friend named Garland Brown. He's a criminologist, and he is to the MLK assassination what I am with the JFK assassination. And he's got a saying, the devil's in the details. You got to find the details. Loren Hall, in April of 1964, Loren Hall, who had not had a regular job since '59, had been a bum traversing the country back and forth, selling stolen guns, living in YMCA flop houses, family pretty much left on their own in California. Didn't make a dime. Him and his wife paid $48,000 cash for a roadside motel in California. Gerald Patrick Hemming, before he got into all this adventurism stuff. He had actually applied to get into the Army Rangers, you know, the jump school, the Special Forces, and was turned down. Turned down flat. Didn't want him. Well, in April 1964, he was admitted. And the next thing you know, he's in Southeast Asia, right when the investigation, the Warren Commission. Investigation's kicking, he's out of reach. Totally out of reach. Hemming. In Noel Twyman's Bloody Treason, there's a document. And what it is the employment application from Gerald Hemming when he actually applied to go to work for the CIA. And again, he was turned down. Turned him down flat. And like I said, this is nothing I found. This is all in Mr. Twyman's book. He gets all the credit. But he has shown a packet of declassified documents on Gerald Hemming from the CIA. One document that is included is his employment application to the CIA. On the back, where you list past employers for references, Klein's Sporting Goods, Chicago, Illinois, from 1959. Klein's is where the Mannlicher Carcano came from. It's where A.J. Heidel ordered the Mannlicher Carcano in early 1963. And if you were going to set up a patsy with a rifle and needed to lay a paper trail to that patsy, wouldn't it be convenient if you had someone knew, say, the ordering forms and the process for the certain sporting goods house, you know, and if you knew the paperwork, it would be pretty easy to lay a trail to somebody, wouldn't it? I'm going to tell you another thing about our pal Hemming, but he also told another researcher, according to Noel Twyman, that he was part of a third hit team that day, backup hit team. This guy was 6'5", about 6'5", 250, according to Army intelligence papers on him in 1961. The day of the hit in Dallas, 2 different witnesses came forward. These guys were not together. They didn't know each other. They were just random citizens on the streets in Dallas. The first one was named Philip Ben Hathaway. He described seeing a guy 6'5", 250, crew cut, wearing a suit jacket, 3 blocks from Dealey Plaza, 45 minutes from the hit, or 45 minutes away from the hit, before the hit, carrying a rifle in a canvas rifle case. Another guy, John Philip Stevens Ruther Lawrence was his name. This guy was 6'3", 220, and he said he stood out in the crowd. But there was a guy walking down the street, he said was 6'7", 275, carrying a rifle in a case going up Ackerd toward Maine and Commerce. He said he knew it was full because he had cases like that. They're leather and canvas. They fold over their limp without a rifle. This rifle, or this case, was full. Rigid, 45-degree angle. Now, well, how many guys 6'5", 250 do we have concrete connected to weapons that are connected to this case? Just one. And my pal, the criminologist, says that'd be enough to pull him in and sweat him, no doubt. I'm very suspicious of Hall and Hemming and Santiago, Hargraves, Seymour, Howard, just this whole bunch of real, live, vicious operators who really didn't care about nothing. And if we can tie them concretely and work our way up, you know, that's another way to get to the decision makers, I think, eventually. Are you familiar with the Nassau Conference in 1995? People like Summers and Fonzie and Twyman and Walt Brown, all those guys went down and met with Cuban intelligence, and they revealed what they know. And they kind of laid out for the researchers what they knew, what they found out over the years. One of the things about you were talking about the multiple hit teams. Their information was that there was a hit team at the Trademark too. There was a backup hit team at the Trademark, you know, in case things didn't go down in Dealey Plaza. That he was basically driving into an ambush there too. You know what? I believe him. I think that I see Lansdale as the project manager. Absolutely. I think there was somebody else on the ground kind of commanding the troops between the ground crew themselves and Lansdale. And I think Lansdale was the direct link probably with the group I call the decision makers.